Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princetonians where we talk about issues impacting our Black and Brown communities. My name is Michelle Jacobs, and I'm here as always with my co-host Ray Smalls.
I was just reading like the other week, and Black Enterprise had an article. Basically, the premise was Black girl magic in sports, in particular. Michelle talking about Sha'Carri Richardson and Simone Biles and Coco Gauff, and I thought it was a great article.
Hey, Black girl magic is real, and I'm glad to see these young athletes getting their props in their sports of their particular choice.
Yeah, and we thought it would be a cool idea to maybe put together a roundtable to talk about the impact of Black women in sports and some of the things that Black female coaches, athletes, and what have you involved in sports have been up against, not just for present day, but for every day. And so, let's introduce some of the folks that we have on our roundtable. First, Dr. Nikki Frank. She was a member of the 1976 and 1980 USA Olympic fencing team and was a two-time national foil champion as a competitor. In 1972, she founded the women's fencing team at Temple University, where she amassed an impressive record of 898 wins versus 277 losses, was a three-time National Coach of the Year, and became the first and only Black female head coach of an NCAA Division I program when she ended her illustrious 50-year coaching career in 2022. During her academic time, Dr. Frank graduated with honors from Brooklyn College and received her master's and doctorate degrees from Temple University, where she is an associate professor emerita at the College of Public Health. She's also been honored by several different halls of fame, including the Women's Sports Foundation, Temple Athletics, USA Fencing, Brooklyn College, and the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. And she's also in my Hall of Fame because she's been my sister-in-law forever. So I just had to get that in. Wendy Hilliard has been a 9-time member of the USA Rhythmic Gymnastics team and was the first Black woman to internationally represent the United States in that sport. She has been a 4-time national coach and was inducted into the USA Gymnastics Hall of Fame in 2008. Wendy was also the first Black and gymnast to be the president of the Women's Sports Foundation and was awarded the Rings of Gold from the U.S. Olympic Committee for her work helping children develop their Olympic dreams. And her Wendy Hilliard Gymnastics Foundation, founded in 1996, provides free gymnastics for over 25,000 urban youth in New York City and most recently in her hometown of Detroit, Michigan. In her varied career, she's been a gymnastics commentator, and Michelle, she's even performed in a Broadway production of Candide and currently serves on the board of the Armory Foundation, Power Play New York City, and Black Women in Sports. And our third member of the roundtable, Sheila Weaver, was born in the Midwest in Des Moines, Iowa. She attended Drake University and received her BS in education. She later went on to her graduate degree in motor learning from Kent State University in Ohio. Sheila became the first woman to serve as coordinator of women's athletics at Union College in Schenectady, New York. And she later moved to Washington, D.C. for an opportunity to become the volleyball head coach at the prestigious Sidwell Friends School, where her teams won 5 independent school league titles. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
She also founded the DC Juniors Volleyball Club and helped athletes earn scholarships to colleges such as Duke, UC Berkeley, Yale, George Washington, and Long Beach State. Sheila's been recognized by the Washington Post as an All-American and All-Metropolitan Coach of the Year, as well as by the LA Times, the Women's Sports Foundation, the National Volleyball Coaching Association, and she was later inducted into the District of Columbia State Athletic Association Hall of Fame in 2020. That's quite a group of commentators we've got today.
So we're so happy to have all of you. Let me just jump in and start with Sheila. And let's start with, each of you have made a significant mark in your respective sport. What were some of the most challenging moments as you pursued your athletic or coaching career? And then, if have any of those challenges changed today?
Okay, well, What I would say is I hadn't planned to be in sports at all. So was kind of the natural thing to do after a while. I was raised in Iowa and we didn't really have a lot of sports opportunities for girls at all. I rarely was kind of accompanying my dad a lot of times. He was a coach and he coached my brothers in baseball. But I was always a good athlete. Of course, I was good at tennis, golf. We did a lot of different things at the park, but was never really organized and running to see who the fastest person was, things like that. And I went to a technical high school. Again, my parents never went to college, and my mom stayed at home. My dad worked in a rubber plant. So I was really looking at what am I going to do for a career, which at that time was to be a stenographer and take shorthand and just be in a steno pool and with some executive. So I went to a technical high school. One of my coaches, well, one of my English teacher said, you should play golf. I said, okay. So without any really instruction, so I played a little golf and I got a sense of what competitive athletics for women at that point in time, before everything revolved around the boys. And good student, was able to get a college scholarship to go to Drake University. Again, I'm not thinking about sports or any of that at this time. I'm just happy I'm in school, commuting back and forth. And because of my athletic abilities, I just started looking into physical education. And that's kind of how I actually got involved more of as a teacher, as an instructor to young people, and learning the skills of being a teacher and instruction, and just kind of led me from there to graduate assistantship at Kent, where I actually was still teaching, thinking more about student athletes and their opinions about Black athletes, actually, in terms of my master's. And volleyball, since I taught all the sports, volleyball just seemed to be the one that I gravitated toward. And so I made that my primary sport.
And look how that's grown over
Yeah, I know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what were some of the challenges you might have faced during that period of time when you were trying to build up your experience?
Well, after I graduated from college, got married, and then I started thinking about athletics for girls in terms of competition as opposed to teaching physical education. And volleyball, again, was my first love. And I was trying to convince other parents at that time that their girls could actually have opportunities in sports. And volleyball was the main sport that I was, kind of letting them know more about. And with that, I just had to let them know there's opportunities. I started She Loves Sports at that time. And at that time, my slogan was to play or not to play. Is that a question? Because I had, they were questioning everything. And now it's our time to play. So it kind of paid off in the end for all of my kids. Most of them got scholarships, D1 scholarships. And we started really a record at that point after I made the decision that I'm just going to take it to the public and try to get interest among the parents and administrators.
Okay, so Wendy, you're also in a sport that traditionally we don't see a lot of Black girls come into. So what was your experience?
Well, I would say in the sport of gymnastics, thank goodness things are changing. Things are changing. When I started, so I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I started actually as a swimmer, as a competitive swimmer. And then I saw gymnastics and that's it. So I was kind of swimming and doing gymnastics. My mother's like, you gotta decide. I'm not gonna do both. So gymnastics, but there wasn't a lot of gymnastics in Detroit. So we were downtown at the Y doing tumbling. We had to go to the suburbs. My mother's like, I don't like this driving up the suburbs, but she was a school administrator. So she had the benefit of being able to get out of school early enough to take me to the suburbs. But she's like, it's too expensive. And she was so upset. So she told the recreation department, why don't we have gymnastics in Detroit? So they hired these 4 coaches from the former Soviet Union, actually from Kyiv. They were working at they were working at the Jewish Community Center, because at the time only Jewish people could leave Russia, right? This is like the late 70s, early 80s. So they came to the recreation department, and all of a sudden we had this really fabulous gymnastics team, because there were like 4 of them: Zena, Rosa, Mike, and Vladimir. And so for us, I always thought, I just thought this is how it was. We had these really great coaches, and if you're going to follow their directions, which were pretty tough, I must admit, but we loved doing gymnastics. So, we became good in rhythmic gymnastics because it was a new sport back then. I took artistic, but then I just switched to rhythmic. We were like 1-2 in the country. So it was us in LA, and the kids were coming from the suburbs to Detroit in the 80s to take gymnastics because we were so good, right?
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, but we were very good. And the thing is, the coaches, it wasn't about how much you could pay. It's just like, if you could put up with their training regimen, and it was tough and it was good, but they taught us a lot of things. I became the first Black to compete in rhythmic gymnastics on the national team. My girlfriend made 2 Olympic teams. And the thing about it also is that we were these great athletes, but we were pretty much the only kids of color that were traveling in rhythmic gymnastics with a Russian coach. Everybody was looking at us. So we had our whole thing going on. We were good, right? And so, I had that. The one challenge I did have was one time in rhythmic gymnastics, one of the events is the group routine, synchronized routine. So we all went out to Colorado Springs to train at the Olympic Training Center, where the volleyball team was training, and they didn't pick me for the team. And this is after I had already made 2 world championship teams. So, I just asked them, like, how come you didn't, what's up? I was on team A. I should have been. Everybody was like shocked when he's on the team. Oh, Vindy, you stand out too much with another Russian coach. I was like, you're literally telling me in 1983, I'm standing out too much and you can't put me on a team. Well, my parents were not having none of that. That same mother that got them the people hired in Detroit, here it is in a telefax at USA Gymnastics. They're like, not my baby. They're like, come on now. And so it was I didn't believe it, but then USA Gymnastics wasn't having it either. And they said, just go by the rules from the national championships, go in rank order. And so our team went. They switched the coaches. It was the year before the Olympics. So, in gymnastics, everybody's feathers are ruffled. But when we got to the World Championships that year, it was so interesting because Cuba, which is the only other country that had any Black rhythmic gymnasts, their team was 5 Black girls and 1 white girl, just the opposite of the U.S. team, and they beat us. But it taught me a lesson that you had to advocate for yourself. That it was surprising that people could still tell you that to your face, like you don't look right, and we don't want you here. But I will say that made me stronger. It made me advocate. It's why I became an athlete rep and Women's Sports Foundation president. It taught me that you still have to fight, right? That's just how it is. And yes, a lot of it's changing. I mean, I'm sitting here, the world championships are going on right now. Simone Biles is probably going to be the next world champion again. But the thing is that you have these really great gymnasts, Black gymnasts at the top, but the grassroots level gymnastics hasn't changed much because of the cost, right? So when my kids and my foundation, when they go, they're like the Black team, but all other teams have 1 or 2. You guys saw the video from Ireland.
Yes.
So that's really how gymnastics looks grassroots, but we have a lot to do. But I will tell you this much. The athletes, Gabby, Simone, Jordan, Shilese, all these athletes, Sky, are just inspiring the young girls. That's what I did not have. My role models were some Russian from someplace else because there were no Black people doing no gymnastics nowhere. But now they have role models, so it makes a difference.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, let's go to you, Nikki. What are you throwing into the mix?
Well, very similar. I think, like Sheila, I was pretty athletic, always played sports. I grew up in New York City, so we were not exposed to a lot of different sports. Basically, we played in the street with your friends, not organized sports, but just playing, which kids don't know how to do today.
No.
And so my senior year of high school, I always played sports during high school. I was on teams, basketball, tennis. And senior year, a new teacher came in and she started a fencing club. And I was like, what is that? But it sounded interesting. And, I tried it out and really realized that this was something that I truly enjoyed. And fencing actually changed my entire life because it changed where I went to college. Because I met someone at a fencing tournament in high school who said, oh, you have to go to this school because the coach is really great and an Olympian. And so it's had a lot of positive aspects to my life. But I think the challenge I've found especially as a coach, having started a team from scratch at Temple University, was that being in a very male, like Wendy, in a very male-dominated, foreign male-dominated sport, being a woman coach where there were only a handful. You could count on one hand how many head women coaches there were at the Division I level. And I was fortunate that my coach was a female, and she definitely was someone that influenced me. But also being the first Black female head coach in the country. And to this day, there still are not any other Black female head coaches 50 years later. And so, the more things change, the more they stay the same. There are more people of color involved in the sport. When I was coming up and starting, there were not very many people of color at all involved in fencing. And so, that there were few Black women, few women coaches, definitely was an obstacle gaining, especially when I first started, gaining the respect of the other coaches, of officials. You always have to prove yourself. But the one thing that I'm very proud of is the fact that right now, there are probably on the high school, club, and college level, at least 12 or more of my former student athletes who are out coaching now. And so that is something that I'm really, really proud of, trying to break down that barrier at least, and getting more women involved in coaching and trying to increase those numbers. But it's very, very difficult.
I got a quick question for you guys. And those of you guys who are in sports with judges, okay, obviously that's a very, very subjective position to have. Did you guys find that judges were harder on the Black athletes, either you or your Black athletes, in their scores than others?
Such a hard question. So judging, especially in gymnastics, and most are judged, the calls or whatever that the judges make, and I know in fencing it's cray. But also in gymnastics, you just learn that you have to deal with it. It's hard to say because they make it really interesting, but I just grew up like every other Black person does in the sport. Like, you gotta be twice as good. You don't have room for error. You learn that pretty early and you just go in. But I will say that you can never think about that. What you gonna do? These are the judges you have. You're gonna have to make your way in a sport no matter what. And eventually it will work out. So that's what I tell the kids. If you focus on that, you will not be successful. You just have to be super bad. That's it, super bad. And that's what you do. That's the only choice you have.
Nikki?
Absolutely. I think that, as Wendy said, you can't focus on that. You have to make it as clear as possible, that it's impossible for them to take it away from you. I tell my friends is, hey, you want the call? Make sure it's one light, so now there's no question. But, there is always going to be bias. And I remember specifically a case now in a sport that's predominantly white, most 99% of the referees are white. And I was at a tournament, a national tournament, and there in the finals, and there was a Black referee. One of the few Black referees was assigned to that match, to that bout. And then all of a sudden, someone else did the bout. They were removed. And I went and asked the head ref.
Does that happen a lot? Is that a normal occurrence?
No, it's not normal. So I asked, why was this person removed? And because this was someone I know, they said to me, point blank, well, we didn't want anyone to think there was any bias.
Wow.
Now, all the white referees who judge all the white athletes, no one thinks about bias then.
Right.
But because it was a Black and a white fencer, we couldn't have a Black referee because we don't want people to think there's bias. And I mean, that is the kind of mentality that you constantly have to deal with. and you just have to make it as clear as possible and worry about the things you can control and not worry about the things you can't control.
Sheila, in volleyball, there's a referee, they're on the net, they're making the calls, there are line judges on either side of where the teams compete. Any occurrence that stands out to you where you feel like you guys were made an example of?
We were at, here in Washington, we have a big festival at the convention center. My daughter's, she wasn't coaching my granddaughter, but the team was playing. Their team has been ranked pretty high throughout, and this tournament draws teams from all over the country, from Puerto Rico and outside the country, and they come in for this tournament. So there was definitely a bad call when the ball was called out, not by the judge who's closest to the call, which is standing by the net. It was called by the official on the stand. So it was clearly out. It changed the whole momentum. There was all these questions. One of the parents was videotaping it. What we did find out later is that this particular judge, the team that we were playing with, they were Puerto Rican players. They had already switched her out before this match started. We found out later that she had requested this match ahead of time. She was assigned somewhere else. So it was all orchestrated by politics now, way ahead of time. So then she went over during the whole conversation with the judges and trying to get everything right. The judge went over and was talking to the other team, and they were kind of laughing and joking, like, it was obviously they had made some kind of agreement, or if they had the chance, they would. So we ended up having to call the tournament. This was like 10:30 at night. We're all still there till midnight, getting this call reversed. Finally, they did reverse it because we had a video. We could see that. But if we hadn't had the video and these other things, and we hadn't made the point that this call was outrageous, and we hadn't known the tournament director being in Washington, D.C., and knowing who founded the tournament, we had all these other factors, and still we had to push to get the call changed. Yeah, it happens. It happens too.
Unfortunate, but I'm sure that's just a snippet of some of the things that you guys have been exposed to. But let's turn our attention to Black female athletes today, such as Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles. They've in the last year or two prioritized their mental health over competition and have taken time away from their sport. Could you guys have done that when you were competing? And what are your thoughts of athletes today stepping away?
I don't think so. I mean, there were no resources. I mean, the resources that the athletes have today, again, I'm thinking on a college level as well as professional level, those resources just didn't exist. I mean, you toughen up, go ahead, just take a deep breath and keep pushing. There wasn't any thought about the mental health of an athlete and what they were going through. If they were injured, how did they handle that? And what kind of help did they get with that? As a coach, work-life balance was non-existent. That term didn't exist. It was like work balance if you wanted to succeed. But there wasn't there wasn't any talk about or resources made available back then, for the athletes or for coaches even. That was my experience.
Wendy, what about you?
No, it's true. There weren't resources. And so that's the key. You have to look at where things are now. I mean, back in the day, remember in the Olympics, you couldn't be a professional. I mean, I used to go to the sports festival and see all those track people driving their Mercedes. I'm like, I don't know what kind of professional y'all are, but I don't have that kind of cash. I mean, you know how it was played. It was just worked around. But overall, of course, you didn't have the resources, number one, because you couldn't afford to do it. And here's the sad thing is that there are probably so many female athletes that didn't compete for whatever reason, you just don't know what it was. let's be clear, because what Simone did, it was a dangerous thing. She couldn't. It wasn't like, oh, I relaxed, I need to take some rest. It's like, if I twist like this, I'm gonna fall on my neck. And I know, and every gymnast in the world knows that. So it wasn't, it's how you frame it. She was really protecting herself, but she couldn't. Here's the other thing that we didn't have in the back day: social media, which gives you the opportunity to tell your own story and have like
Right,
a million people
right,
agree with you instead of waiting
right.
for some sports people to do it. So that's it's making a much big difference. But like Nikki said, it was the resources. We just didn't have that option.
Sheila, in volleyball as a coach, I mean, what kind of pressures are you under, or your athletes under, as they sit down and they look at some of the things that some of the professional athletes have done recently in terms of stepping back? How do your athletes handle it?
I think, again, there's this awareness now that the game is more than just the physical, that there is a mental aspect to the game, where previously we weren't really thinking about that too much. We're just like, working on skills, working on techniques, working on things like that. So I think the fact that the change in society, that there is need for mental health in all occupations, all professions, and that these are needs that athletes need to address. So in volleyball, just like everything, there's jealousies, like we were saying earlier, between teams and coaches who favor other players over you. And you think, so you have all these internal things that pull at you mentally, as well as the outside forces of other teams, competitors, other parents, just in the club and at the high school level. And that probably just continues for each level that you encounter. But I think the fact that we are recognizing mental health is so important. They've really opened up a lot of doors so that it's common to expect those things now.
It's interesting because Wendy talked about the positive way that social media can help an athlete, but there's a lot of negativity that is on social media that is actually addressed to individual athletes, and that screws with their mental health. Correct, Nikki, Wendy, Sheila?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. We have a student newsletter that comes out, and one of the headlines is those on the rise and those on the decline. If you're a student athlete and you read your name on there, but in addition to the social media pressure that athletes have to put up with or have to deal with, I think the other thing that's different from when we were athletes and growing up is the parental pressure. That my mom was just glad that I was doing something and not in the street making a fool out of myself. And so it was just now, these parents, some of them, the pressure that they putting on some of these athletes, and you end up getting a kid. Like, I'll get a kid now who's been fencing maybe 10 years before they even get to college. And they're at that point, some of them aren't sure why they're there. Besides, that's what they're supposed to do. And so I think there's a lot of pressure also that affects their mental health and them coming to grips with themselves and who they are as they grow into young adults and start to find themselves.
It's just all fascinating, the change in society too, towards recognition of the pressures that young girls are under with social media, and just in general, the whole our rethinking of the mental health issue for everyone, including athletes. It's just so terribly important right now. But you all mentioned the issue of lack of support. So I want to sort of focus on how the economics of college sports is changing with amateur athletes. So now we have a situation where college athletes can actually earn money. So how is that impacting the Black female athletes, or just Black athletes in general?
I'll just jump up, not as a collegiate athlete. I didn't have the opportunity, because I'm sure Nikki can take this, but I will say, especially in a sport like gymnastics, is that they have a choice. Again, they have a choice, right? Simone and everybody up until the last, 3 or 4 years had to choose between being a great Olympic athlete and taking the money, or going to NC2A. So now the athletes can do both, right? So Leanne Wong, who's like the number 3 athlete and at world championships is competing for Florida, still competing for, it's really hard to do both in gymnastics, but she can. And so that's the thing, is that you have the options that are open to you. So that's another opportunity and to make money off of it. But I will say, you know, I'm going to leave it to Nikki. She had some really good point about the parents, because gymnasts start young. So we have to deal with parents very, very early. And that's super true. And they need to, I told them, if you're not in there watching your math class, you don't need to be watching this gymnastics practice all the time. Let the professionals handle it. You know what I'm saying? And so if we get back to that, it would be a lot better for everybody.
Now, Sheila, I know that in our pre-talk, you mentioned something about helping the students prepare for that transition into some kind of economic reality. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Just speaking about the parents and their expectations for their kids, and the roles of the parents and the students who are starting sports at a young age, and even younger, as you know, younger and younger. I just feel that they need to first get some basic concepts that will allow them to figure it out, because you're still figuring out no matter which direction you go. But if they have basic understanding as a parent what my role is, and as we approach this athletic endeavor, and what my role as the student athlete or the player. So I have this thing about the player-parent partnership, and then how mindset is so important. It's a kind of a course I'm putting together. So there's the mindset, it's NCAA, don't be afraid. So we're all more afraid than ever now. So we kind of have to look at that, the NIL, look at the various forms and ways that you can participate in NIL.
Excuse me, Sheila, can you let our audience know what NIL stands for?
Oh, sure. It's name, image, license. And it's how student athletes can monetize their name, or if they have a product that they are really advocating for or endorsing. Someone, say it's an Instagram ad and they're drinking a certain drink, and the kids are watching this particular athlete and they wanted to be like them. So they'll click on it and it'll take them to that drink, and they could possibly get a case of it or get a pair of shoes. And so it's still just kind of, I think, open. There's so many forms of how NIL can go, and how students and universities approach it, as either as a team, an individual. There's lots of agencies, financial planner. You know, it's just crazy. I don't want to say it's crazy, but it's good that it's available. It's just trying to figure it out. And as you know, with athletics, you don't have a lot of time to figure it out as a parent and a player.
You know, a quick aside, you know, and she's a gymnast, so Wendy knows her. The gymnast from LSU, Olivia Dunn, right? She's white, she's cute, she's blonde. That woman makes tens of millions of dollars right now. Okay, she's on national commercials. Okay, I don't know any college. There's only one college athlete that's got that kind of exposure. This kid, that's the quarterback for USC, Caleb Williams. Right. He's got some national commercials, but there's nobody making more money than Olivia Dunn right now. How does that work, Wendy, Nikki, Sheila?
You stole my thunder, because that was the point. The NIL it's like the wild, wild west. It is so out of control. But the fact that athletes have an opportunity to make some money based on their image and likeness, and the name, image, and likeness, is a good thing, but it's just not, it's out of control. And it was thrown out there without guardrails. And so there are athletes that are getting taken advantage of. There are people that are lying all over the place. But the main thing is that most of the NIL money is going to male athletes. The vast majority is going to male athletes. You have entire football teams that a car dealer said that everyone on the football team will get an NIL from me, and all they have to do is do an ad on their website, on their social media about my car dealership or whatever. But once you take football out of it, then it's interesting, because most of the money is going to females. But as you said, which females? You have to look a certain way. It's sexuality that they're playing on. And if you don't fit that mold, then you're not getting that same NIL money, whether you're a better athlete or not. It's not based on your athleticism and your results. It's based on how you look. And
Gosh, we go one step forward and three back.
yep,
Go forward.
exactly. But it's out of control, and the kinds of money that's being thrown around. But a lot of schools are finding, well, first, initially, they were told schools couldn't even advise the kids on NILs. They couldn't give them advice. And so a lot of schools now are doing, financial education for their athletes to help them navigate so that they're not being taken advantage of.
Mhm.
And at some point, the government and Congress, if they ever get back in session, will, there's all kinds of legislation being introduced in Congress to try to manage it. But it's so lopsided and it's so subjective on who the money is going to.
I just want to say, I think too, because the NIL is barely pretty much, you got to have some kind of skill, or you got to have someone who thinks you're cute or likes whatever you say. Because it's anyone, especially on Facebook and Instagram, if you have popularity, that's kind of NIL, is monetization, is not called NIL. So there's so many different routes to get to figure out how you can make money off your brand or your image or your likeness, that it's there's a lot of hype about with NCAA and athletes, but there's also a lot of people just make money online because they cook a certain food and people come on and they want to buy their recipes. I mean, it's kind of like marketing and business, but it's I guess taking total ownership of it. Usually if you're in a business or you're branding yourself, then you're taking total ownership of how you're gonna make your money, if you're gonna hire somebody, if you're gonna have an attorney. So that financial education that you were talking about, I think is so important to what's gonna make your entity, whatever it is, your name or your product. To me, it's like, is business on uncertainty. I don't know. The concept is there, but which way do you go? It's hard to say.
Right. Once again, it's funny how decisions are made and there's no thought to what comes after the decision and what the ramification or consequences are going to be. But as always, we get to, the time and we're like, how did the time go? So we're going to wrap up by asking each of you, what is it that you want young female athletes to know, or what's the thing that you want them to take away, or their coaches to take away? I'll leave it to you to decide who you want to address, or their parents even. But what kind of help can you give them in trying to figure out how to go forward with their athletic careers?
Wow, there's a big one. Okay. Let me just give a little bit of advice for the rest of your life. The only thing I would say, and I would say this to athletes, is embrace being an athlete. It's really one of the most important things you can do for your life as your health is concerned, because that's the one thing, is you'll know how your body is, and it's very important for women to have confidence in that. The other thing is confidence. Sports gives you confidence, and you need that to go out in the world. You need to be able to speak up for yourself. You need to be able to present yourself out there. If you have these things, which are all leadership skills, but really self-improvement skills, that's the one thing I feel very confident in. What I do with my kids, I want them to be great gymnasts, but I really want them to have a good work ethic, right? You got to work. Let's be clear. You got to be able to put it out there, whatever you're doing, social media, whatever you want to be good at, you have to be able to put a lot of effort into that. So I think that's what sports gives you. As a Black woman in this country, you got to be strong, and you got to be relentless, and you got to have some metal up in there. And so just take advantage of what sports gives you to what it can give the rest of their life. And then remember, you always have to pass it on and give it back.
Great words. Okay, Sheila, how about you?
Well, I would say to the athletes and the parents that I think initiative is the most important thing you can have. You have to take some of the questions you have and find some of the answers yourself, or investigate more. You can't rely on a particular coach who's at a particular club that you feel is going to take you where you want to go, because they may, but then they may take leave and go someplace else. or you are maybe also, I really believe now the whole testing and training and individual performance helps student athletes figure out, and parents at an early age, what direction their sports career should take. Sometimes you're in the wrong sport. They don't know it yet, but they are. They could be in the wrong sport. And if they did some of that, then they wouldn't be feel like they're wasting money, wondering, why am I not playing? Why am I not? Well, it's some of that information that you sometimes don't get initially. You have to kind of like flesh it out for yourself.
Okay, okay. And Nikki, we're gonna have you wrap it up and give us the last words.
I think in terms of the life lessons that life lessons that sport provides you, that will carry with you and guide you no matter what you do after sport, whether it's coaching, whether it's professional athleticism, whether it's business, professional growth. All the lessons that we learn in sport, I think we all would agree are the ones that projected us forward. And so I think that being involved in sport at whatever level is so important. Not everyone is going to be an Olympic athlete. Not everyone is going to get a D1 college scholarship. That doesn't mean there's not something to gain from their participation. And I think that's one of the problems that I see today with youth sports, that unlike myself, and I did everything through school. My mother didn't have the money for me to go to any private club, but now it's pay for play. And now parents are having, if you want your youngster or if you want your child to excel, it goes beyond what the schools are offering. And so, clubs organizations like Wendy's, like the Black Women in Sport Foundation, are so important in providing opportunities where finances are not going to be a barrier. We take that barrier away and still provide those youngsters with an opportunity to gain whatever they can from being in a sport, working with other people, listening to coaches telling you what to do, learning how to be a good teammate. All of that is in the business world. All of that is in the world in general. And those are skills that every athlete will gain. And so providing opportunities so that it's not, and removing some of the financial barriers especially for young Black girls. You're finding some of the sports that had fairly decent amounts of people of color in them, that's getting lower and lower and lower at the higher level, which now is limiting. You say, oh, so there's not a good volleyball team in middle school. Well, if you're not on a good volleyball team in middle school, you're not going to be on a good one in high school, and you're not going to college on a scholarship.
Right.
And so it all trickles down. And so we have to think about youth sports and enhancing those so that these opportunities will stay on the plate for young athletes going on, because what they do in middle school and what they do in high school affects the opportunities that they're going to have in college.
Words, all of them. And so for parents who have kids in sports, whether they're female or male, what you're saying touches on everything that affects their kids.
I love this episode because it's right in my bailiwick.
Ray doesn't often get to talk about sports on our show. But hey, it's important. It's important.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you, sisters, so much for coming on and sharing your time with us and your just wonderful words. And I know that our listeners are going to really appreciate hearing from all of you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has really been great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much.
Well, Michelle, time flies, and we didn't even really get to all the questions that we had for our guests at the roundtable.
No, I mean, it's fabulous information, and we could have easily talked to them for hours.
And while we were recording that show, just to bring our listeners up to speed, Simone Biles did lead the USA to another world championship title. For her individually, she's won 30 career gold medals, or 30 career medals, I should say, during the world championships, and 37 overall between the world championships and the Olympics. And that's amazing because remember, she took 2 years off for her mental health, and that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. There's no question about it. No question about it. Great show. If you like what you heard today, please visit our website at www.nubiantigerspodcast.com, where we post all episodes and a resource page with additional information on every podcast subject. You can also find us on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers Podcast channel. Our other social media is on Mastodon, where our handle is at Nubian Tigers Podcast at blacktwitter.io. Our podcast is hosted by Anchor FM, which is now part of Spotify. But if you have a favorite podcast app, we're probably on it. Look for Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.